Mrs. Rosalind Carter at the White House.
133 of the member states of the United Nations have declared a decade for women. Equality, development, peace. These are the goals for the coming years. They underscore the belief that women's destiny is the same as all humanity's. The struggle calls for a basic commitment to human rights, and American women know that by strengthening their ties with women from all around the world, they can be a great force for change.
The tradition of human rights has deep roots in this country. In 1840, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton went to the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London. Even though Lucretia Mott was a delegate, they would not seat her on the floor so that she could debate the issues of the day. They said that was not the proper place for women. These women were internationalists, but they went home pledged to do something about women's rights.
For these women, right through to the early part of the 20th century, votes for women became a critical issue. It became an all-out struggle, both at the state and federal levels. Women were ridiculed, arrested, but finally, the vote is won. But this was just the beginning. Very soon throughout the world, women realized that the vote alone was not enough to guarantee them full and equal participation in society. A lifelong struggle had begun. Today, it has still not been resolved. With the growing awareness of discrimination against women, the United Nations set up in 1946 a commission to study the role and status of women. Dr. Davidson Nicole, Under Secretary General of the UN.
As far as women's rights are concerned, the status on the Commission of Women started about 31 years ago. And it did make progress in questions like the political rights of women, things like property laws, marriage laws, and so on. But it lacked the fire which came with the 70s. And this was due to women themselves in different national groups who put that pressure which crystallized in the International Women's Years Conference. And the United States was one of the small group which was most active in this.
U.S. participation also involved other initiatives. 1973, the U.S. Congress passed the Percy Amendment. This law requires that American foreign aid programs give attention to the particular and special needs of women in developing countries. Senator Charles H. Percy.
I was astounded, for instance, to discover a few years ago that our American AID programs, technical and economic assistance abroad, was actually widening the gap between men and women in developing countries. For instance, in the area of advanced degrees, scholarships and fellowships in the United States offered to these countries, 92% went to men, only 8% to women.
Wilmot Brown, Black Women, Wages for Housework.
The last line of the poem engraved on the Statue of Liberty is, "I lift my lamp beside the golden door." That's supposed to symbolize sharing the wealth with immigrants from all over the world. That has never been true for women. The unpaid work that women in the third world have done for generations, for centuries, is stored here in New York and in London and in Paris and other metropolitan capitals of the world. And women are denied access to that wealth. Just as the unpaid work of women in this country has created the wealth of this country is denied to us.
Because we know that the question of money is really key to all the questions, all the problems that we women have. Because having money is really the possibility of having some choices in our life. To choose whether we want to have children or not to have children, to choose whether we want to marry or not to get married, or not to have to get married only because we have to depend on men economically.
What happens to the older woman who has not pursued a career, but who has instead devoted herself to others? Mrs. Sally Spielman.
I receive a Social Security check. And fortunate enough, I live in a house that don't belong to me, belongs to my sons. They have been wonderful, these children. I never went to work. I raised them just being a mother, joining clubs, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, taught Sunday school, and stayed close to home all my life. And it has been paying off with my good children. I couldn't live on the government's check. They supplement me, but I'd rather be an independent person and not depend on my children. We all are more or less free souls, and we'd like to feel this way in everything we do, because only God knows how long we live, and we'd like to enjoy the few years we have left.
In 1975, a presidential executive order establishes the National Commission on the Observance of International Women's Year. This commission was directed to coordinate and promote the interests of women in the United States throughout every one of its states and territories. And in June of 1975, an International Women's Year World Conference, organized by the United Nations, was held in Mexico City. Pat Hutar, U.S. Delegate to the UN Commission on the Status of Women.
Now, it was said before the World Conference convened that women from the developing world and from developed countries would have absolutely nothing in common, and they saw our task as being impossible. Nothing could have been further from the truth, because women from all areas of the world were able to work together, and 133 nations unanimously adopted the World Plan of Action. And one of the most significant actions called for in the World Plan of Action is the establishment of the United Nations Decade for Women that runs from 1976 to 1985.
At the same time, voluntary organizations also held an International Women's Year Tribune meeting in Mexico City.
There were 6,000 women there from 100 countries. Even though some of us think they were all Americans, Americans were in the vast minority. There were rich, there were poor, there were many middle-class women, and above all, they had a common bond. They were not satisfied with the way things are. A tin miner's wife from a tiny mining community way up in the Andes came to tell us that their struggle as women was a struggle for survival, that nothing would change until the total economic structure of the country was changed. If women's situation is to change, women themselves will have to change it.
After Mexico, women dispersed, but women and women's organizations and associations of both men and women continue to discuss the themes of International Women's Year. Betty Reardon, the chairperson of the Tribune panel on peace and disarmament.
The whole of the International Women's Year and International Decade has been inspired by the idea of peace. Peace not just in the sense of eliminating war, but peace in the sense of eliminating human suffering. The business of dealing with human suffering has really been the business of women, what women's lives have been about for centuries. And now more than ever, we need those skills and those concerns in our public life. We need to have women taking part and forming public policy, not just for this decade, but for our whole future.
Malika Wathratam from Southeast Asia was a Tribune panelist on social attitudes and tradition.
Organization of society right now is in the hand of men. Therefore, if women are not concerned about this issue and get involved in the policy level, women will be left out totally. For me, I think that if this decade that we declare Decade for Women and Development, if we still see women outside and men inside of the planning room for all these key development sectors like population, energy, food, I think that the decade has failed.
Margaret Heckler came home to co-sponsor a bill, along with Bella Abzug, to finance and hold the International Women's Year state meetings and national conference.
As a congressional advisor at the International Women's Year Conference in Mexico City, I saw women from all over the world coming together. I realized that if women's lives were to change in America or anywhere else, it was necessary for women to change themselves. As a natural adjunct of that conference, I wanted to bring the experience of sharing to the American woman, wherever she is, wherever she finds herself. And therefore I co-sponsored a bill which authorized an International Women's Year Conference, nationally, to be preceded by a conference in every state. The point of these conferences was to attract women from the broad spectrum of America to share with each other, regardless of income, regardless of race, creed, color, philosophical point of view, and whatever other barrier separates women. The point of the sharing is to look at each other, to compare their lives, to consider the yardstick of justice for all in America, and as a result of these conferences, to guide the Congress and the President in terms of legislation which could be helpful to women everywhere.
Equality, development, and peace, the goals of the International Decade of Women, can only be accomplished when there is equality, development, and peace within our own society. We participate in a historic moment. We are holding state conferences, and we will be electing delegates to a national conference from every state and territory of this nation. This is the first time such a thing has happened with a law and funds supported by the United States Congress. What we do with these conferences will make a difference in everybody's lives. We will reach consensus, and we will continue to have differences. But surely, we have, for the first time, the tools with which to make a difference in our lives, in the lives of our children, and in the hopes of democracy. For women, yes, but for men and women in this country, and I think having overreaching effects all over the world.
The promise and potential of our future lies within each one of us. The decade of our destiny begins.